The family wasn't ready for the house they had just moved into. Four of them, middle class, hopeful, with routines they thought would keep life normal. At first, nothing seemed wrong, but soon, small noises began from beneath the stairs. Scrapes, shifts, always at night, always from the same corner. Something was there, watching, waiting. In today's story on Division 8, we'll cover a house that shouldn't have been lived in. What happened there is hard to explain, and no one who lived through it would forget it. The family who moved in wasn't rich, not poor either, middle class. They had enough to get by, careful with every expense, careful with every choice. There were four of them. A father who worked long hours in a factory, a mother balancing two part-time jobs, a teenage son who spent most of his time in his room or outside, and a younger daughter who clung to routines and small comforts. They had left a cramped apartment behind, walls too thin to hold privacy, rooms too small to store their things. The move promised more space, more privacy, and a chance to start over. The house was old, not falling apart but showing its age. Paint peeled in corners, floorboards groaned under weight, doors stuck sometimes. Windows rattled faintly when the wind blew, though the wind wasn't always there. Nothing alarming on its own. A home with character, they told themselves. A place to belong. A fresh start for four people who were careful with money, careful with life, careful with choices. At first, life moved normally. The parents unpacked boxes, finding places for plates, glasses, clothes. The teenage son explored the backyard, noting where the sunlight hit the grass in the morning. The daughter wandered the hallways, peeking into rooms and noticing the small imperfections of the house. A crack in the plaster, a faded stain on the wall, a hinge that squeaked. Meals were shared, laughter filled the kitchen, living room, and even the cramped hallway. Everything seemed ordinary. Then the first sound appeared. Soft, almost polite, like it didn't want to be heard. A brief scrape, gone before anyone could react. They blamed the house. Old buildings made noises. Pipes, wood, drafts. They ignored it, telling themselves it was nothing. A few nights later, it returned. Closer this time. Still subtle, still deliberate. Always from the same corner of the hall, under the stairs. They didn't think much. Not yet. Families adjusting to a new home noticed little. But the youngest daughter paused one evening. She stared at the small wooden door beneath the staircase. Something felt wrong. She couldn't explain it. The hair on her arms stood up. Her chest tightened. She went to bed uneasy. The next morning, dust on the floor caught her attention. Faint lines pressed into it. In and out. Almost imperceptible, but clearly there. She pointed them out to her parents, who barely glanced. "Just the wind," they said. "Old houses are like that." Still, there were no scratches, no smells, No obvious signs of life, just subtle, quiet traces. Days passed. The family's routines continued. Breakfast, school, work, dinners, small talk, laughter. Relief returned. Life felt normal. The parents felt reassured. The son shrugged it off. The daughter watched quietly, suspicion growing. But the sounds never fully stopped. At night, soft scrapes returned, sometimes only once, sometimes longer, always measured, always from the same spot. By the end of the first week, unease had begun to creep in. The cat hissed at the corner near the stairs. The dog stayed close to the base, ears stiff, tail low. Animals always sense it first. The parents noticed tension in the family, but blamed stress from the move. The son complained of restless nights. The daughter begged for the lights to stay on. Small arguments broke out over trivial matters, but no one linked them to the house. And while the family slept, someone, or something, was awake, watching, learning, mapping the sounds of their lives, the rhythm of their steps, the pattern of their nights. The space under the stairs wasn't empty, not anymore. Something was already living there. Days turned into a week, and the family began to notice small, unsettling things. Nothing major at first, just minor annoyances that could be explained away, but together, they felt wrong. The teenage son started hearing soft noises at night. Scrapes, shifts, almost like someone was pacing behind the walls. He would wake, staring at the ceiling, heart racing. The parents dismissed it as imagination, the result of moving stress. The youngest daughter was more sensitive. She noticed cold drafts near the stairs, even when the doors were closed. Sometimes, she thought she saw shadows move just beyond her vision. She told no one. She didn't want to be told it was silly. One evening, the mother reached for a box near the base of the stairs and felt it shift slightly. She froze. It wasn't heavy enough to move on its own. The father didn't notice. The daughter watched from the doorway, wide-eyed. That night, the sounds returned. Scrapes, dragging. The family slept fitfully, disturbed by faint creaks and thuds that seemed purposeful. The cat hissed again. The dog stayed pressed against the door, low growls vibrating through the floorboards. Animals always sense it first. Morning brought more signs. Dust on the floor had been disturbed again, deeper this time. Not random. Patterns formed. Lines in and out, suggesting movement. The mother stared, confused. She had cleaned the hall the day before. No one had been near the stairs. Small things kept piling up. The daughter complained that toys she left in the hallway were slightly out of place, as if nudged. The son noticed scuff marks on the floorboards near the door. Tiny scratches. Nothing severe, but enough to notice if you looked. They began to talk quietly among themselves, but carefully. The father suggested installing a small camera. The mother hesitated. "It's probably nothing," she said. "Just the house settling." But even she could feel it. Unease wrapped around the edges of every ordinary moment. The son stayed up late, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. He reported seeing a flicker, a shadow moving just beyond the doorframe. His words were met with skepticism, but the feeling lingered. He wasn't lying. The daughter, more perceptive, began leaving small objects near the door. A pencil, a piece of paper. By morning, some had shifted. Not much, just enough to confirm her fear. Something was moving in and out of the space beneath the stairs. Even during the day, the family could feel it. The air near the door felt heavier, warmer. Objects left nearby seemed subtly rearranged. Pets stayed close. whispers of movement that couldn't be heard clearly but always felt brushed against their senses. By the end of the second week, the family's routines were affected. Sleep was shallow, conversations were quieter, eyes lingered on the staircase more than usual. The space under the stairs was no longer just a corner. It had become a presence, something alive. No one saw it clearly, no one heard it speak, but everyone felt it watching, measuring, learning, waiting. And still, the family carried on. Life had to continue, but they could no longer ignore the signs. Something was there, and it wasn't going anywhere. By the third week, the family couldn't ignore it anymore. The small door under the stairs had become a center of quiet dread. They no longer passed it without a glance, no longer ignored the soft irregularities in the floor around it. It started with the scratches. Faint at first, almost invisible, but growing sharper, deeper, more deliberate. Lines in the dust, marks on the wood. Something or someone had a routine. In, out, back again. Every day the pattern became clearer. The youngest daughter refused to sleep in her room for a few nights. She would sit in the hallway, staring at the door. The air felt wrong, heavier, warmer. Sometimes she swore she could hear the faintest breathing. The son tried to investigate. He crouched near the door, listening. The air shifted against his skin. A subtle warmth pressed outward. A smell, faint, sour, hovered, gone before he could identify it. He reached to touch the door. The handle didn't move. The wood was solid. Yet the feeling of presence was undeniable. The parents argued quietly, behind closed doors. Should they remove the door? Board it up? Call someone? They settled on waiting. It was easier to convince themselves it was nothing. Easier to keep pretending. But even in their denial, tension grew. Conversations felt lighter, laughter forced. Steps slowed near the stairs. Then small items started disappearing. A pen, a notebook, a shoe. Nothing valuable, nothing important, just things left near the hallway or the stair base. They didn't vanish entirely, they moved. One morning, the daughter's stuffed bear was found in the kitchen. Not dropped, placed, upright, facing the stairs. Pets reacted first. The cat flattened, ears angled, watching the door constantly. The dog refused to enter the hall at certain times. Growls vibrated through the boards, low and warning. Both animals were alert during the day, tense at night. The family started noticing. The air grew heavier around the door, still warm, still faintly sour. Breathing sounds? Sometimes, almost imagined. Other times, too clear to ignore. The son stayed in the hall for hours one evening, listening, scribbling notes. He recorded what he could hear. Faint scraping, a dragging sound. Sometimes the quiet settling of something larger, shifting. One night, the mother tried to sweep the dust from the floor. The lines had returned before her broom reached the center of the pattern. She froze, hand frozen over the wood. Marks weren't random. They suggested awareness, intention, rhythm. The daughter whispered to her brother, eyes wide, "It knows we're watching." The son didn't reply, but he felt the truth. It did. Every movement, every pause, every small motion, it had noticed. They weren't invisible. The family began sleeping with lights on, checking doors, holding each other's hands. They were still living there, still moving through routines, but the presence under the stairs had begun to dictate their behavior, its rhythm, its territory. By the end of the week, nothing had shown itself fully. No face, no figure, no sound louder than a whisper. But the air had changed. The hall smelled faintly sour, a subtle tension pressing into bones and nerves alike. And the dust again told the story. Deeper lines, tighter patterns. In, out. Back, in, out. The space under the stairs was no longer part of the house. It was no longer just a corner. It was alive, and it was waiting. By the fourth week, the house no longer felt familiar. The presence under the stairs was no longer subtle. It had grown bolder, its awareness more obvious. Small things became impossible to ignore. The daughter refused to enter the hall after dark. She whispered to her mother, "It's watching me." The mother tried to soothe her, but even she could feel it. The warmth of something alive pressed through the air, subtle but undeniable. The cat stayed pressed against the wall. The dog refused to enter the hall, and the sounds became harder to dismiss. Scrapes, drags, faint thuds. They were deliberate, patterned, confident. Doors that had always stayed closed sometimes appeared slightly ajar in the morning. Not enough to suggest a break-in, not enough to panic, but enough to make the family question their own memories. Objects shifted. Books moved. A shoe disappeared for hours, then reappeared in a different room. Nothing valuable, nothing taken, just moved. Sleep became impossible. The parents woke in the middle of the night to creaks from the stairs, the subtle shifting of something under the door. Every step sounded louder. Every breath felt heavier. The family's routines started to bend around the presence. They moved quietly, careful not to disturb it. Or so they thought. The daughter started leaving small offerings near the base of the stairs. A pencil, a small toy, scraps of paper. Sometimes they were untouched in the morning. Other times they had been nudged or moved, upright or to the side, always suggesting attention. Even during the day, the house felt different. Halls seemed longer, corners darker. The stair door radiated warmth, faintly sour in smell, and the air around it felt thick. It was aware, measuring, learning. The family felt it watching their routines, anticipating their movements, pressing into their lives without a visible form. The son tried to film the hall at night. Cameras set on tripods captured faint movements, shadows brushing walls, dust disturbed. But footage couldn't show intent. Nothing obvious. Just subtle evidence. Objects slightly shifted. Patterns in dust. The slightest distortions in shadows. By now, conversations had grown cautious. Laughter was quieter, steps more measured. The parents argued less, tried to maintain calm, but tension had seeped into every moment. They were living under observation. One night, the daughter swore she heard breathing behind the door, slow and deliberate, measured to the rhythm of her own. She froze in the hallway. The air pressed closer. The mother found her shivering, clutching a blanket. The father reassured them, but even he avoided the hall when he could. Even the house itself seemed to respond. Floorboards shifted beneath their feet in new patterns. Doors closed differently. Windows rattled with no wind. The structure had learned, or at least adapted. The family tried to ignore it. They continued daily routines, ate meals, went to work and school, pretended all was normal. but the house had changed. Their routines bent around it, small adjustments made unconsciously. No one spoke about it aloud anymore, but all four felt it. Something lived under the stairs, and it had begun to dictate the rhythm of their lives. By the end of the 4th week, no one slept fully. Dreams were restless, nightmares quiet but insistent. The space under the stairs was no longer just a part of the house. It had become a presence, shaping their lives, unseen but palpable. And when the family moved, even slightly, or spoke too loudly, or hesitated in their routines, the presence noted it, adapted, learned, waited. They weren't living in the house anymore. The house was living with them. And the space under the stairs was no longer empty. By the 5th week, the family had changed. The house had changed. Everything was quieter, slower, cautious. The presence under the stairs was no longer subtle. It had been acknowledged in ways they wouldn't admit aloud but couldn't ignore. The daughter refused to enter the hall after sunset. She left her door open, lights on, a small toy beside the door as if offering it a truce. The son walked past the stair door without looking, careful not to make noise, careful not to invite attention. The parents adjusted routines, silent agreements replacing arguments. Meals were served quietly, conversations brief, laughter scarce. The small signs had grown, dust patterns clearer, deeper, indicating movement. Items had shifted again. A notebook on the hallway table was gone one morning, returned later, open to a random page. The smell lingered faintly, sour, warm, unmistakable. The air around the stair door pressed in on anyone who approached. One night, the son stayed awake, notebook in hand, trying to record every sound. Scrapes, thuds, faint shifting, soft breathing. Nothing visible, no door moved, no shadow passed. Yet the pattern was there, deliberate, attentive, calculated. He felt it study him, measure him, learn his hours, his rhythm. The daughter heard noises while brushing her teeth. Paused mid-motion, a soft scrape followed by a small thud. Her reflection in the mirror seemed off. Not her face, something behind it, hinted in movement, gone when she turned. She ran to her room, shutting the door. Sleep didn't come. The parents began noticing subtle changes too. Floors groaned differently. The hallway air felt thick at times, almost breathing. Objects in different rooms were shifted, tiny, inconsequential things, but enough. Every time they stepped near the stair door, the atmosphere tightened. Pressure against skin, subtle warmth. One evening, the father tried to open the stair door. No key. The handle didn't budge. The wood was solid, but the air pressed against his chest. A faint, sour smell. Nothing else. He stopped. He could feel, more than see, that something watched. Something new. Something had been moving in and out of the space long before anyone noticed. Sleep became shallow. Dreams restless. The children woke, screaming, only to find the house quiet, but somehow wrong. The parents rose in the night, hearts pounding, checking the hall. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared. But the door radiated pressure, warmth, silent awareness. By the end of the 5th week, the family had learned a new routine. Avoid the hall. Don't disturb the space. Leave small offerings. Move quietly. Speak softly. Live carefully. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a territory. They were visitors, observed, measured, studied. No one ever saw the presence clearly. No one spoke its name. No one discovered what it wanted. It existed only in subtle movements, faint patterns, the warmth of dust disturbed, objects nudged, air thickened. The family stayed. They adapted. They survived. But they were not alone. The house was no longer a shelter. The house was alive. And under the stairs, something watched. Patient, silent, waiting. Nothing more needed to happen. The fear lived there, constant, quiet, unavoidable. The family knew it. They felt it. And for them, that was enough.